Hello, hello, hello. How we doing? Yesterday was an emotional roller coaster for me. Yeah. So Kate is going to come on and we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about my experience with anxious feelings and anxiety, and I'm going to share a little bit about what yesterday was like. Hi, Kate. Let me let you in. And yeah, we're going to talk. How do I want to set up here? Hello.
Hi, Ruby.
Hi, Kate.
How was class?
Class was lovely.
Good.
It was good. It felt good to teach. Um, and it's sunny, and I liked my playlist. You know, so nice when there's just like, it felt like, you know.
Feels good to feel good.
Well, good is maybe
Not
a
bad.
stretch, but feels
I
good
see.
to feel
To feel what?
space.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Listen, something that I was thinking about before we got on here is like the past couple days we have just both been like, hey, I don't want to do this today. Meaning like this IG live thing. And I just feel like I would like to take a moment to be like, Ruby, we used to would have not have done that.
Yeah.
And it feels really good to me that we can now.
Mm. Yeah, I'm so
That's
grateful
nice.
for that. That we can
Me
be like
too.
honest and ask for what we need and like mean it
Hmm.
that. Yeah. So basically you haven't seen Kate and I this week yet because Kate had a day on Monday and I had a day yesterday, and
Day. And sometimes it's just like there's like part of what self-care for me is knowing when and with whom I have to show up or I'm choosing to show up. And there's sometimes when I really am like, okay, I'm going to show up for this thing for the Ivy Live, right? And we've done that. We've both kind of been like, today we don't want to do it, but we're going to do it anyways because this is important for us. And then also it's like other times it's like, okay, this is still important for us, but what's more important for me is that I need this or this or this. And so I'm choosing that today.
yeah, and being able to like, that feels like discernment to me,
Hmm.
and also like being able to discern when like my preference for something is safe to be public, like beyond my, when it's safe for me to like go beyond my preference in order to connect, or when like my preference is trying to tell me something about like, because I think that's hard to discern in the internet spaces, of like, well, if I share everything, then like what gets to be mine? And I think that's really important, an important place of discernment. So I know like we've both had days where we're like, we don't really want to do this, but we're like, and we're committed to this and we're showing up. And then the last few days we've both had days where we're like, we don't really
Hey,
want
Cortez.
to we don't really want to do this. And the discernment piece says like, this isn't, I can't show up fully, and this isn't for like how I am today, isn't for consumption.
Hmm. Hmm. Oof, yeah, that word consumption is a big one. I have some things that totally I could say about that, but I think that that's for another time because I want to hear about you today.
Oh yeah. Well, short story time, and then also like I just want to acknowledge you for holding so much space for me yesterday to just like be not great. And I acknowledge that like in the midst of that, you also had like two very challenging days this week too. And yeah, just thank you. Um,
Yeah.
and it's so interesting too because like we'll get into like what came up for me yesterday and stuff, but like today I feel like a little clearer and a little like better, so to speak. And I even mentioned this to you like earlier when we talked briefly on the phone of like, it's so funny how like one moment I can be like, this thing is like the most important thing and it's falling apart and my whole world is falling apart and nothing is right. And then the next moment I'm like, fuck it all. I don't give a shit. Like whatever happens, happens. I guess I'm going to go lay in the sun.
Yeah.
And so today I've arrived at the part where it's like, fuck it all. If it gets done, it gets done. And if it doesn't, it must not matter that much.
You know what song that makes me think of? For starters, okay, so I've had laundry, like clean laundry in the dryer for like a week, like an extended period of time. And this morning my roommate was like, "You gotta know when to fold them. Wait, hold them. Know when to fold them." And then the other song, okay, so Ruby and I took this van trip. It was so fun. In November, is that right?
Mhm.
And we made this playlist and it was called like They're Driving Through the Country Again. And we put like every single country song that we grew up on this playlist. And one of them for me is who sings this? Is it Terry Clark that might give a damn busted? And like that really is how I feel sometimes. I will care about something or what really I notice is that my body has energy around something. And oftentimes I think I misdirect what that energy is actually about. I think we all do that. We like project it onto something that it's not actually about. And then, like, depending on how hard I go on that thing, and then eventually my body is like, stop it. And then it's like, Matt, give it to him. Anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like crossing over, there's like a threshold, right? Like yesterday was one
Mm-hmm.
of the days where it was like, I already was like, my body knew what I needed. And in some ways I didn't give it that. And in other ways, what was required of me couldn't give it that. And then that just like really spiraled into something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, yesterday it was just like, I woke up with like anxiousness in my brain. It felt like a herd of wild horses trampling in various directions in my brain. I couldn't really like hold a focus or like form a thought, but I felt that kind of like movement and like energy of anxiety. And it's interesting too because anxiousness and anxiety is something that like has surfaced for me and has been present for me. And I think that it's really tied very much to like my perfectionism and also just like the way my brain is like wired. Like I think I also have like I'm on some sort of spectrum of like ADHD. That's something I've talked with my therapist a lot about. And so I think like all of these things interplay. And so anxiousness is something that I've experienced a lot of. And though this is also so funny because like just a few days ago, I was like talking to myself as I do. And I was like, wow, Rubes, you feel like very balanced. Things finally feel like there's like a flow and like you're not working as much, but it actually feels like really balanced with the rest of your life. And then it was like hitting a brick wall. Like I used to feel like low levels of like anxious feelings very regularly, and then I've done a lot of work to like do things like take walks and lay on the ground and like learn to cope and with it. And like last year, like 2020, really like not long after this time last year, I really came face to face with that and had to like learn to navigate it. And I definitely think that points in my life where I'm like prone to like anxiety, and I want to hear your thoughts on like the difference and like what that means, like anxious feelings versus anxiety. But yeah, yesterday felt like a major spiral, and for me, like the feeling difference is like anxiousness is this like buzzing like in my brain feeling of like I can't focus, and I feel maybe like my heart rate feels quick, or I feel kind of like if I've drank an extra cup of coffee, like one too many cups of coffee is like a similar feeling that anxiousness is for me. But versus like moments that I just, in my experience, categorize closer to like anxiety are like yesterday I just spiraled into like literally everything was like causing those kinds of anxious feelings. Old stories of anxiety surfaced. Everything was hitting me all at once. It was like there were some tech issues at the studio, and the tech issues at this, my frustration from the tech issues at the studio, first of all, resulted in tears. Second of all, turned into like all my old stories, like everyone's going to leave my business. I'm going to be abandoned. My business is going to fail. I'm fat, ugly, and undesirable. Like all of the things surfaced up. And to me, like that feels like anxiety when it's like all the old stuff that I know is not true, that I've worked through to like unlearn and dismantle, all surfaces up and kind of like washes over me. Where, and like I did the things that helped me cope with my anxiousness and they didn't work. And those are the moments when I realize like, oh, I really need patience, trust, and space to like let this ride. Because I went on a walk and it did not do anything.
Yeah, it's like I think there's like this expectation that when we unlearn something or learn even like just a new way of dealing with that thing, that the old shit will never come back up again. And then it comes in and it's like, and you're like, what? I didn't see that coming. And then for me, when that kind of thing happens, when those like old things come up that are so ugly, that then for me couples with like shame that it's
Oh
even
yeah,
there
then
in
there's
the
the
first
part of me
place.
that then there's the part of me that's like, we have worked through this already. That thought is not even relevant to today's situation. There is no reason you should be feeling that or thinking that, and like, how dare you? And then that makes you undesirable and unlovable because you can't get rid of this like thought. You can't like you must not really believe that, like all of this. And I
Okay,
had
so
even
what you're talking about, which is something that we talk a lot about in all of our trainings and at Heartfelt always is this idea of the story. You want to talk about how that plays in for you? The
Yeah, I can
story?
talk about that. Yeah, and like the way that I like to think of it and describe it, and if I had a whiteboard feature in IG Live, I would use it. But like something happens, and that's like there's a fact there that an event occurs, and then there's a response to that fact. There's some sort of like um, reaction from like an emotional reaction. There are thoughts that come up. There's maybe an exchange with someone else, and they're from like the feeling and the thoughts we kind of like build a story. So that means that like a great example is like a fact yesterday was that the microphone wasn't working for our online classes in the noon class. And then this like from that I felt frustrated. I had thoughts of like just like disbelief and kind of like what's happening, why is this happening to me? And then from that the story is like I'm incompetent, my business is not going to be successful if I can't figure this out, and I don't feel like there's the way I feel about tech things. My story about tech things is kind of like it works until it doesn't, and then you like look at it the wrong way and it like it's like a moody, it's like a fiddly fig. It's like if you rotate it any direction or you like look at it the wrong way, it dies, it messes up. And so but the story, right, you hear the difference between like a microphone didn't work in a class and then my brain jumps to my whole world is falling apart and my business is going to fail.
And why is this happening to me?
And why is this happening to me? This is
Totally.
happening to
To
me.
me. This is happening to me. This microphone is happening to me. Yeah, and so okay, so what happens when why why is being able to recognize stories in a moment of anxiousness, anxiety, why is it important to be able to recognize them?
Mm. Yeah, and you know that's something that I feel like like I have a lot of years of practice in like calling story what story is, but it's been a more recent development in my self-awareness to be able to like pull out from emotion and like see the story. And what that feels like it allows for me is kind of like a zoom out and like a bird's eye view of like, okay, this is the feeling I'm having. This is the story, like believing and like kind of making up about it that I'm telling myself. And now I can like hold space for that. And it's very helpful for me to think about it as though I'm like two people, and as though like the emotional and like story person in me is kind of like the young like child version of me, or like a young child who I care about. And it would be like if a kid ran up to you and they were like, I fell and scraped my knee, and why did this happen to me? And like, Sally must not like me because she brushed by me and I fell. Like, right? Like something like that. And I feel like I'm able to like zoom out and like be the grown up in my life and be like, oh honey, I hear you, I love you, it's gonna be okay. Because the young part of me, the story part of me, because I recognize that there is a story, kind of just needs space for it to dissipate, right? It just needs like space for it to like, it feels very pointed in the moment, and it just really needs space to expand and like soften and settle. Um, because if I get stuck in the story, then the story just starts to run my life like very quickly. Like, like if I don't take myself out of it, then maybe my whole week is like ruined by the story. And like every interaction I come into with my friends or clients or whoever is like being run by the story. And I'm like looking for ways to validate. Everyone thinks my business is a technological mess and we're going to fail, you know? And so even like yesterday, um, being able, and I feel like I was able to maybe like articulate this in a new way. Like it's, but like when the things that I usually do to cope with anxious feelings weren't working, I realized and was able to point to like, I just need to be soothed. I don't need to try to fix or solve or even like successfully cope with this. I kind of just need to like soothe and soften and like leave space and probably like distract a little. It's kind of like
Yeah,
it's kind of like when a little kid scrapes their knee and it's like not that bad of a scrape, but they feel like their whole world has fallen apart and they're just like pitching a fit about it, and you're like, here's a lollipop, and all of a sudden they're like not crying anymore. That's I need the lollipops.
totally. Because it's also like the lollipop is like an offer that says, I hear that your experience is really hurting. I hear for you that you are having a really hard time with this whole me thing. And here's a lollipop
Mm-hmm.
because I hate that you're hurting or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And then there's
Okay,
some
so
distraction, and then I feel able to come back, right? Like to wrap back into it and be like, okay, so like now how is my skint knee? And then it's so easy for me to visualize this picture as like a child, right? And you give them the lollipop, and then they like kind of like soothe, and they're enjoying the lollipop, and in the middle of enjoying the lollipop, you're kind of like, so how's your knee? And they're kind of like, I forgot about it, or like it's good, you know.
I
And I
think
think
it's a little better now.
that part feels important, right? Like the check back in feels important, um, because like just the distractions doesn't leave enough kind of like space.
Mhm. Yeah, and because without the check back in, those things will come like rearing back up. You know, it's not like complete. It doesn't feel complete.
Yeah, but the check back in allows some space to be like, oh, this one really wasn't that bad. And then that lets my brain know, oh, my whole world wasn't actually falling apart. Now we can acknowledge that because the emotion has calmed down. Wow. Next time
Yeah.
I feel more equipped to meet myself in that.
Hmm.
Not that it's not going to happen again or that it's going to be fixed, but like maybe my response time will be quicker next time.
Hmm. I have, and I've told you about this probably a million times, but I don't know, a couple weeks ago, I finished a book that Africa Burke had recommended on her page called Conflict is Not Abuse. And like just what you were by the way, I have two things that I want to kind of like flush out. One is that like having the conflict internally, if we don't continue the conversation and if we don't get it to where it feels complete, more complete, or at least open to the conversation, and what you're saying about like how it feels pointed and I think a lot of times what we think is that the goal is that it should go away. But what I know, like for me, fear is a thing that is like omnipresent, always present for me. Um, and what I know about it is that fearlessness does not exist. So the expectation of me to never feel the fear that exists for me in my body is unreasonable, and therefore I will only fail that thing. So instead, I like what you said of that feeling of like dissipating for me, or I like the what I like to think about it as like integrating into like a conversation piece in my body. And so now that feels more like a moment of conflict instead of a situation of abuse or harm.
Mm.
Like, for instance, I had a huge realization about this in regards to like previous sexual trauma for me and what and I could feel it in my body, and I was just like driving in my car, and it feels like a wild realization, but a real barrier for me because of my previous experience in having romantic relationship is this what it's going to be like? My experience tells me this. So that's what it's going to be like. So I don't want to do this. And I was like, yeah, I was just driving, and I was like, Kate, it doesn't have to be like that. You've you've grown. If this happens to you, what tools do you have? For starters, I don't know, I'll fight you. Next, I can communicate with you verbally. I have practiced
Hmm.
these things. And so now like all of a sudden there's more safety to me there. There's more inherent safety because I can create that for myself.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that that comes up in a lot of ways. Like I've even noticed that with myself from like relationship to relationship is like realizations that I've had where I was like, oh, and this isn't related to anything I would call like abuse or even like over crossing of boundaries. So like not exactly like what you're speaking to, but even in a more subtle way, I noticed being like, oh, this person did this one small thing this one time that looks like what this other person used to do all the time. Does that mean that this relationship is going to end exactly like that one did? And then I'm like, so I think it's like a common thing that the brain likes to do because it's like this is what we know, so this must be what's true.
Totally.
And it's a process to experience and learn differently that we have to like be open and available toward.
Hmm. Totally. And then the second part of that, you were talking about, okay, so I'm just going to recap like really kind of like blanket statement situation. Okay, so you had the microphone situation at the gym. It needed, or at the studio, it needed your attention because this is your business and this is like sometimes you got to deal with some stuff. So this needed your attention. Then there's your body and all of the shit that's going down for you in your body. And it sounds like kind of like you woke up with some stuff. So it's like, so then this thing happened and like that, all the other stuff got worse. What I'm hearing you say is that your self work gives you access to having containers to deal with what needs to be heard. So even though the microphone situation is also happening in your body and all this other stuff is happening in your body, if you go into the microphone situation with all this stuff, the microphone person who's like helping you is like, Ruby, this is just about a microphone. And like, how do, like, I'm trying, we need to talk about the microphone situation. But then if you're over here talking about your feelings, we're never going to be able to deal with the microphone situation. So like this isn't necessarily a situation where with this person you need to be dealing with this stuff. With this person, you need to deal with the microphone problem. And we see this happen all the time in, I say we, that was ridiculous. What I meant is like, um, well, Rachel Ricketts speaks to this all the time. So what happens for a lot of times, like white ladies, is in a situation where harm has occurred, meaning we've been the one who have perpetuated racism in a relational dynamic. We get stuck in the feelings part, and then we cannot have the conversation about what is really happening here. So the self work is a tool of separating. So instead of bringing to this conversation about how has the harm been caused, where we bring all of our other stuff to that. You have no idea what's been going on with my day. My day was really hard. Like, so like I'm tired. I'm exhausted. Like whatever. And then we never get to the bottom of this situation. And
Mm-hmm.
damn, we never get to the bottom of this situation either. So this tool of being able to like separate our stuff so that we can deal with what's in front of us, and then and the other part that I like about what you're saying, which is also something that I've learned recently too, from in working with both my therapist and then working with Sarah Jane Chapman, um, is like sometimes what I'm feeling in my body doesn't have answers or rhyme or reason, or like I don't know what really it is, but I can feel it. And so sometimes it's just giving, instead of over incurring the thing that can just cause more brain spaz, it's like I feel sensation in my chest. I'm experiencing, and sometimes I know whether or not it's like I'm feeling fear, I'm feeling afraid, this is fear, or like I feel shame, or whatever. But just like naming the sensation and letting it stay in, and maybe it dissipates sometimes, and maybe sometimes it doesn't. But what I do appreciate about what you're speaking to is how important it is to be able to separate our,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like
I'm kind of done.
knowing when to bring what online and when to keep what offline, right? Like knowing that when I'm like dealing with the microphone situation, even though I am a full human who's having a full spectrum of a day outside of the microphone situation that is not helping the microphone situation, and the microphone situation is not helping me, I know that when I'm dealing with something like that, I have to be online for the microphone situation, and I have to turn my stuff offline in order to get that sorted. And then later, whether that gets sorted fully or not, I have to learn to turn that offline in order to sit with myself and see the feeling and turn that kind of like, now it's time to soothe, or like have a container for that to happen, bring that online. And like I think about like what you were mentioning about anti-racism, and especially like white women, and like what, you hear like white fragility, and like that as a concept is what you're speaking to, is like a fragility of like not knowing how to take something offline, not
And it
ignore,
it
not
also,
ignore.
I think it's like that like the centering, the like white centering
Yeah,
of our feelings instead of the issue.
right, yeah. And that comes up in a lot of ways, but you mentioning that, like I think about like my experience with coming to terms and waking up to racism in my life, and like the ways in which I realized that like what was helpful is for me to go offline and have conversations with you. But like my experience in creating a safer place within my business and in my relationships, and kind of like solving that out in the world and like doing the right thing for the work I was working on, is like, that's a different thing. That's not a place for me to come with like, oh, like I feel shame and my feelings are hurt because I was trying to be a good person. That's a conversation for me to take online in the appropriate container, which like you're a relationship that I have that is an appropriate container for that. Yeah, so it's like having enough awareness of what's happening, that there's an awareness of what container holds what, and when is that appropriate. There was something else I wanted to say about that. But yeah, it's like letting the emotions process. Oh, there's a degree in that is just taking ownership. That like, yes, I'm a human having a full human experience, and I can't control what feelings have come up, but I can take ownership of my role in holding those feelings within myself and taking care of business on the outside and like doing what I need to do. And like you and I have talked a lot about this with like intuition. And yes, I believe we all have like intuition. There's a place in us that knows. Our body is trying to guide us all the time. But like, I can't just like listen to my intuition all the time. That would be irresponsible. So like a great example that I love to
Say
give.
more about that.
Yeah,
Say more about why. Okay.
Yeah, a great example that I love to give is like, yes, I teach yoga classes. If I am hungry in the middle of a yoga class, I cannot just, because my intuition says you have hunger, I cannot just walk out of the yoga class and eat a snack. I have responsibility to this hour container with this group of people, so I have to do my job. And then it is my responsibility to take ownership if I notice recurringly that my intuition tells me I'm hungry in the middle of a class, that I have to be prepared next time and eat beforehand so that I can fully tend to my duties as a movement professional for that hour that I've devoted and committed to. So like knowing the difference between like where's the container for commitments versus the container for intuition. And I do think we have the capacity to integrate those. And though we cannot go one way or the other on the spectrum, right? Like I have very much been in like commitment end of the spectrum, never listen to my needs, never fulfill the need, don't eat breakfast because it's inconvenient. So I don't have a lot of experience with in myself the opposite end of the spectrum of intuition. And I do have people in my life who I've in a relationship with who are on the other end of the spectrum, where it's literally like, I need to lay in the sun, so I'm going to drop literally everything I'm doing and everyone who might need my support or my job, and I'm just going to go lay in the sun, or like whatever, you know, intuition.
Yes, I do know.
And it is our responsibility to meet ourselves in the middle and fulfill our duties and commitments, take ownership, and take care of ourselves. And honestly, like doing that is a full-time job.
My God, ain't it though? I didn't eat dinner last night, and in the middle of the night, I was so hungry that I had to get up and eat dinner. That was just me not eating dinner last night. And for no particular reason did I not eat dinner. I just like wasn't in the mood. And then I couldn't sleep because of it. And it was like, you have to get up.
Mm-hmm.
And I ate
Yeah,
some
and you
pizza
still
that was
had to
left out
get
on
up.
the
You
counter.
still had to get up and start your day because you have commitments in your day.
I did.
And this,
Yeah.
it comes back to our conversation at the beginning of this talk, where we were talking
Hi,
about
Courtney.
knowing the difference of discerning, right? So it would be different though if you woke up and like your body's giving you cues of like illness, or like you cannot, and then maybe you make an exception and rearrange or like cancel plans or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're doing that all the time, it's kind of like the boy who cries wolf, and eventually we're flaky if we're just like always abandoning our commitments for whatever feels good in the moment.
Totally. And it's
Or
also like that can what that can turn into is this like you have no respect for anybody else but you and your damn intuition and yourself. That is unacceptable.
and on the other end of the spectrum, also unacceptable to be so tied to commitments that there is no room for humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Is also unreasonable.
Unreasonable and unacceptable. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it comes down to like a discernment of knowing when and in what things, the containers for things exist. And like that's what my self-work and my practices of self-awareness have given me, so that on a day like yesterday, Yeah, I could fulfill the commitments that were required and even like be honest in those, you know, like I came into the studio in the afternoon to try to like to make sure that the 315 was like taken care of and resolved. And you know, my team's like, how you doing? And I was like, I've had better days and let's solve this.
Totally. I have had better days, but let's solve this problem so that it doesn't have to keep being so heavy so that I can go deal with the shit that's going on with me.
Yeah.
These are multiple different issues that need to be all not messily intertwined. They need to be unintertwined, all acknowledged for their parts and their pieces, and then dealt with accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
It's all part of who you and your experience.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, even that feels like it feels like and okay, and then the other part that's really important to me because we're kind of talking about I like and I think that this use of the word container is important instead of compartmentalizing because what compartmentalizing to me feels like it's separate. Containers feel like something has a place. And then oh, what was I going to say about containers though? Oh, because I think it's important to not for those things are not interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I think something that's really important, which you are not doing in this situation, is hiding.
Mm-hmm.
You're using your containers
To keep myself
to stay present.
kind of like clean lines within myself to stay present with the task at hand. Different than, yes, I love this. Because like compartmentalizing would be me kind of like putting on a face to look a certain way so that everyone thinks I have everything put together. The containers just allows me to walk in the studio and know that I can't process my shit, but I can be honest that there is some other shit going on.
Yeah, like the microphone guy.
Hey,
Damn
Haley,
microphone
you
guy.
saw me at 3:15 yesterday when I was like, I've had better days.
Yeah, I've had better days, and right now I don't really want to talk about that. I want to deal with this problem, please. That is
Yeah.
so okay.
And I think I think also like as we learn to be in relationship with people, which is really like, that's like the battlefield of the self work is being in relationship with people, um, is learning to allow space, acknowledge, and honor what that person needs in their own containers, like what they need to bring forth and be present with. So, like, something that I really appreciate with my current guy I'm dating was that there was one day where I like came to him and was like, "Oh, I'm kind of like in my feelings about like this thing." And he was like, do you want to talk about it or do you want to like be distracted? And I think like it is so common in our worlds of wellness and also just like as people living in white supremacy culture where everything needs to be like fixed or perfected, is that we dive right into like, where's this coming from, and like let's feel it out and solve it and like tell me all about it. And that's just like not always the container that is is needed. And so being in relationship with one another, being able to honor if someone else's need is whatever it is, that it doesn't mean anything. Like if you need a container of, we got to get down to business and I can't talk about like my emotions right now, then it's like, it's my duty to like not make that about me and let you have that until, and trust that if you need me to help you hold a container for feeling through it, you will go there with me or ask for that.
And something I think also about that is like sometimes I have felt like that people have felt that my process, that they're entitled to my process. And what you just did with your body, you just like stepped back from them, your chest went up like, don't. Like, yeah, that is how that feels for me when somebody wants to either process before I'm ready to process, or or like or projects emotion onto what I'm feeling so that then I don't even get to have an experience of it. Now I'm just navigating your experience and my feeling.
Yeah, or when someone maybe like tries to solve it, like just go straight to like I'm trying to like fix this for you
Hmm.
when we're
Or the
not in the
overemphasizing is no good.
hmm?
This like overemphasizing
Hmm.
when we get wrapped up with people's stories, when we get wrapped up, and then it's like those stories all just like mesh together, and then we never deal with the actual issue.
Hmm.
Hmm. And like, and what that is, like, especially when I think about, okay, like in using like you and me, right? Like, I talk to you about anything that I have to talk about, I've already told you about it. So, like, what I mean, why that feels important is that we have a gajillion containers. The main one is like the safety that we both know exists in the entire relationship. That is like this big like underarching one that's very important. But then like yeah, we have to create these little containers for ourselves because like sometimes I want to process with you. Sometimes I want to numb out with you. Sometimes I want to hear your advice and your opinion. Sometimes I need to feel validated. And it's like we together get to create those containers and tell the other person what container we're in right now. I am in the I need you to be pissed with me container. Are you available?
Yeah, and it's taken a lot of like I think throughout our relationship, we have both desired this kind of like intimacy in our relationship. And so then it's taken a lot of practice and diligence on both of our parts to get into a habit and a practice of like using language around this is what I need from you, or like, can you hold space for this? And I think like that's where we get kind of like sticky as people is we just want it to like be right all the time, and like we should be able to read each other's minds and like figure it out and like be someone's support and know exactly what they need. And it's like actually what we need is better communication skills so that we can all get what we need.
Totally. And like we've known each other for a long time, but think about all the people that you've only known for like a year, that you feel closer to in this 1 year. I have people like that for sure. And there are going to be people like that again. Like, so, like, this is an ongoing process with different people and obviously different dynamics between different people of creating containers that work between those two people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think too, as we do our own self work, and then we're in relationships like the self study program where there's like a whole group of people for this, in relationships of practicing this, then when someone new comes into my life who maybe and probably doesn't have the same experience I do with this sort of thing, I can be like, this is what's worked for me. Can we try this together? And then they get the opportunity to learn how to express what they need, which maybe they've never gotten to experience before. And that can evolve very naturally, like that new container with someone. So instead of like writing people off because, oh, they don't get it or like they don't do this kind of whatever, it's inviting people in. So, like doing our own work within ourselves and with one another on the same page in the same container, that ripples out and affects people all around us. And that's where like taking ownership for our own containers and the way we process our stuff makes such an impact in our immediate communities, in a bigger way in the collective. I feel like I get like disconnected from that quite often of like, oh, like the choices that I'm making in my self work not as a point of like pressure, but like it matters.
Yes, it does. And sometimes it's like the reminder of that it matters happens when it's put into practice. So it happens in the discomfort.
Mm.
Like yesterday, I had hours, like a whole, like, it was like it was a 6 hour period. It started at like, whatever, I had an all afternoon yesterday, but I was just like, and it was a total shit show, to be completely honest. All sorts of stuff was going down. And I was like, wow, like I felt a lot of sensation in my body, but I got to have it over here. And then I really feel like I was able to have some really cool conversations that I wouldn't have been able to have access to if I wasn't able to put like my emotional container like over here. And like, was it exhausting? Like, yes. And more than that, it was an incredible reminder of this, the work that we've been doing together, my self work, my anti racism work, my anti oppression work. Like, I got to put that to use yesterday. And I'm grateful that I was able to show up.
Mm-hmm. Something I want to say about that too is like the self work has allowed you to create that kind of like containering system, and your body allows you to do that because you have taught your body that you will come check on the emotion container. Just give me a minute, right? It's just
Mhm.
like dealing with a child. It's like, honey, I promise we will talk about how you're feeling about this after we get through the grocery store, after we've bought the groceries, right? Like I see that there's a feeling coming up, whatever, and I promise we will talk about that when this other container is finished with. I will be back. But
Mhm.
like I know for me, like what I did for such a long time was like put the emotions in a box, compartmentalize, and never go visit them, never visit them, put them away in the attic, and then eventually that just like didn't work for me anymore because my body was literally like, you have to pay attention to me and take better care now, please. There is no choice. But like you're able to do that on a day like yesterday, and I was able to do it. We were doing it at the same time in different ways, because we've built a relationship of trust, and our body, it knows that we will come tend to that container later,
Mhm.
and then that makes it okay to step into the reality of like what's happening now and what needs to be done and the conversations that need to be had. Whereas used to then, because they, like it got to a point for me that like my emotions knew they were not going to be addressed, and so they just like flooded into the situation.
They just explode out of there onto everything else. And you know what? The other thing that came up for me just now too, Ruby, is like, so for us yesterday, like I knew you were in all your shit. I was in all my shit. And what the other part of trust is like in our relationship, I trust that, like, I trust that you also have community outside of me too. And so then I don't have to be responsible for your shit because I know that you are. And then, okay, like for instance, I used to have I I used to have a friend who always, every time they text me, they'd say, "How are you?" And then I'd have to like drop into my feelings and be like, "This is what I'm feeling right now." And then I'd kind of get like stuck there because that's not actually where I was at in the moment that they texted me that. But the expectation was that I give you an emotional response, that I share where am I at, like emotionally. And that wasn't always the container that I needed to be in the moment. And so it's nice that I can trust that you're going to tell me what you need to tell me.
Yeah,
And
like if
I
I
don't have to
really,
force that
really,
out of you.
you can trust that if I really, really need you, I will let you know.
Yeah. And that is so nice.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Wow, I really like where this conversation went. This container thing is like, I mean, we talk about it a lot, but like to flesh it out like this just feels like so clear and like really like a successful. It has helped me successfully like navigate my life.
Hmm. And I think we first got the language of container I think we got it from Brene Brown and Daring to Lead. She talks about it there. Um, yeah, but the way that that has expanded over the years is I love.
Me too. Yeah, and then today I woke up and I was like, okay, I have a headache because I literally didn't drink any water yesterday. and and feel a little clearer. Oh, and like I said, I feel like, well, fuck, whatever doesn't get done doesn't get done. Here we are. And that's the thing
Yeah,
is like
resilient.
when I have intense feelings, it's like what I've learned about that is like space, patience, trust, and space. Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, like after all my shit yesterday, I got in the bathtub.
Right.
The container for the feeling.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
Well,
would love for you to join the self-study program.
please join the self study program
Yeah.
so that you can practice
Um,
like this with us.
yeah, and I just really want to drive home like Ruby, your self-work doesn't keep your life from having challenges. I
Yeah.
used to think that I could work all the way to the bottom of anything that was hard and then be done. And that ain't it. And I'm glad that's not it, because then what would even be at the bottom or at the end, or feels to me like what would be at the bottom? There'd be no like connection. There'd be no intimacy. Nothing. If nothing is hard, then nothing is impactful.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, and really like doing the self work and like what we've created the self study program for is kind of like a practice for day to day resilience.
Hmm. Yeah.
And like so something I want to say to that too is like often I know that like I have avoided or resisted doing things that I know I want to do or I feel drawn to because it's like not the right time or like something in my life would distract me from it or it's like not perfect like something's not perfect about I don't know whatever it's not perfect I need to wait till it's perfect in order to get the most out of it and it's like wow we've really underserved ourselves with that belief because it's really when we commit to something and allow life to continue happening that deep transformation can take place so it's like instead of compartmentalizing our self-work let's learn how to create containers for it.
Hmm. And then also like sometimes the self-work for me at kind of like the beginning, the self-work felt so pointed. Like I'd be doing something in kind of like an automatic kind of way, and then the self-work would like be like, but have you been vulnerable about this with people? And then I'd be like, the shame of how I'm not good at vulnerability or whatever. And then it was like yeah, like such a spiral. And now this self-work is integrating. It's like dissipating because it's just always present.
Right. The expectation is that I'm always being in relationship with myself, I'm always doing the work. Instead of trying to like work on myself to then what step into my life as a brand new person and everything goes smoothly and easily and whatever,
Yes.
and no one has to see me sweat. Like for me, that
Yeah.
part's important, right? Like I get to look like I have it all together if I've like done it all on the side and then brought it into life. But it's like, wow, I spent so many years trying to do that, and I missed out on so much like meaningful connection and intimacy in relationships, and I kept people from really getting to know me.
Hmm.
And so I kept myself from being able to be like seen and understood and loved. And now I have to like work through that as one of my stories.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, okay, never mind. I'm not gonna say it because I need to flush it out before I can say it.
Okay. Next time then.
We deserve to be loved no matter where we are in our process, and also having access to understanding myself makes it easier to receive love is something that I've learned. Because if I understand me, then I don't need for every single other person in the room to. Like I'm just like, it's okay if you don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the people who do get it, I can see them.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Wow. Hey, thanks for showing up for me and being part of this conversation.
Yeah, always. I love you.
I love you too. Everyone, join the self study program.
Absolutely, yes. 100%.
You can apply in both of our bio links and or schedule a 15-minute call. We would love to talk to you.
Hmm.
The group is really shaping up. I'm super excited.
Starts the third week in March. We meet for 2 hours every
Starts March
third.
17th, which is like really apropos because that was like the 1 year.
Totally was. March 17th. Oh my God, Ruby, I hadn't even put that together. Okay, well, let's get together. Let's do it. Let's do it. If 2020 taught us a plethora of things, but one of those things is like, yeah, we have some work to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that like it's work on ourselves that and we can't do it alone.
It is work on ourselves, and the work that we do on ourselves is the work that we do on the world, and we can't do any of it by ourselves.
Okay.
I I think that quote is by a guy named like George Leonard or something. But I don't know who George Leonard is, and that's all. I just wanted to name that I didn't make that up, and that I think some other guy named George did, and I haven't done any research on that guy, but I really love the quote, and it's true.
Oh.
Okay, love
Okay, love
you.
you.